am 34 years old, Isabella Harrington, the family's greatest disappointment, a legacy born from generations of naval excellence in London's most elite circles. They looked away when I left Sandhurst, but they never understood the truth. I wasn't running from something. I was running towards something far greater. Recruited tonight at my father's gala, they remained oblivious to the encrypted device in my pocket, the one capable of commanding operations across continents. The drive to the Ministry of Defence was filled with hollow anticipation. Then came the moment inside that ballroom, the final wound from an aunt's careless words. In front of a senior naval officer, she asked loudly, "Isabella, dear, are you still stamping forms down at the Department for Energy Security?" The words hit like ice water down my spine. My throat closed. The smile I manufactured felt thin, fragile, a mask I had perfected through countless painful family gatherings. Have you ever been made invisible by the very people whose blood runs through your veins? If you understand that specific ache, comment below. I see you. Stay with me, because you are about to watch this invisible woman become the architect of her family's reckoning. That practiced smile was my armor, a defense mechanism honed through decades of formal dinners in my family's Knightsbridge townhouse. These weren't casual meals, they were mandatory ceremonies of judgment and expectation. Tonight was no exception. I sat in a simple navy dress, trying to occupy as little space as possible, a ghost at my own family's table. The air hung thick with the scent of my mother's roast lamb and the suffocating weight of unspoken criticism. Across the table, my father, Admiral James Harrington, spoke exclusively to my sister, his voice booming with unmistakable pride as he discussed her upcoming command. Commander Sophie Harrington, he tested the title, savoring each word, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. It has an excellent ring to it. My mother, Margaret, a woman whose spine was as rigid as her social standards, subtly corrected the way I held my wineglass. A single, almost invisible shake of her head was enough. I adjusted my grip immediately, the familiar sting of inadequacy tightening in my chest. The clink of silverware against Royal Doulton was the only sound that seemed to acknowledge I existed at all. I felt like an understudy in the grand performance of the Harrington family, a role I was never meant to truly play. All I wanted was for the evening to end. After the meal, we moved into the drawing room, where a fire crackled in the marble fireplace. This was the stage for what would come next. My father stood before the mantelpiece, that place of honor reserved for family portraits and military medals, and produced a worn navy velvet box. My breath caught. I knew what it contained. The Harrington heirloom diamond, passed down through generations of distinction and achievement. He opened it, revealing the brilliant stone nestled inside. He didn't look at me. His attention belonged entirely to Sophie. He took the ring and slid it onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. Then he finally turned his gaze toward me. Those steel-grey eyes, the same shade as my own, were cold and utterly dismissive. "This," he said, his voice dropping to something far more cutting than any shout, "is for someone worthy, Isabella. Someone who truly understands the Harrington legacy. Someone you will never be." The words hung in the oppressive silence like a death sentence. My mother smiled, serene and satisfied. She approved of this judgment. Sophie raised her hand, admiring the diamond's sparkle beneath the lamplight. She cast me a look that mixed triumph with pity, and my stomach turned. I felt my hands clench under the table, my nails pressing into my palms. The pain was welcome, a distraction from the crushing weight in my chest. I couldn't breathe in this room anymore. "I need air," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. I escaped onto the back terrace. The cold London night air shocked my heated skin. I stood beneath the ancient oak tree, its bare winter branches silhouetted against the city glow. I refused to let tears fall. They would not have that satisfaction. They had taken everything else. They would not take this. Then my coat pocket vibrated. Not my personal phone. This was something else entirely. Something from a completely different world. I pulled out the device, a sleek encrypted communicator no thicker than a credit card. The screen glowed with a single line of text. One name. The name they didn't know. The person I truly was. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, clearing the fog of pain. Reaching into my wallet's hidden compartment, I retrieved my ring. It was white gold, not platinum, with a deep blue sapphire at its center, the symbol of the service. I pressed the ring against the device's screen. A soft chime. A flash of green light. I looked back through the window at my family, silhouetted by firelight. They thought they had defined me. They thought they had already won. A real smile, the first genuine expression all evening, touched my lips. They believe I'm not worthy. But do they have any concept of what worthy actually means? The cold metal of the sapphire ring felt heavy in my hand as I drove away from Knightsbridge, a stark counterpoint to the diamond I had been denied. It wasn't the first time they had written me out of their existence. The first time hadn't involved words spoken by a fireplace. It had involved black ink on legal documents. A quiet, permanent erasure. The memory surfaced sharp and unwelcome as the city lights blurred past my windscreen. It all began with Sandhurst. My departure wasn't the weakness my family portrayed it as. It was an ascension. I still remember the scent of old books and floor wax in General Sir Edward Ashford's office, the founder of the service, and my grandfather's oldest friend. He was a man who saw past the quiet, uncomfortable girl my family saw and recognized something far more valuable. A mind suited for the intricate, silent wars of the modern age. He didn't see a failure. He saw potential. The ceremony was secret, attended by only 3 witnesses. But the weight of the oath I took that day was heavier than any medal my father could ever display on his uniform. I wasn't dropping out. I was being recruited into a world my family couldn't possibly comprehend. Of course, they never knew that. To them, my leaving was a catastrophic failure, a public stain on the pristine Harrington name. The fallout was immediate and devastating. My father didn't speak to me for 9 months. It was a suffocating silence, a punishment delivered through complete absence. I would see him at the breakfast table, his jaw tight, reading the Financial Times, my presence completely ignored. My mother's disapproval was far more theatrical. There were tearful telephone calls, dramatic sighs, and endless lamentations to her friends from the country club about how she had failed as a mother, how her youngest had thrown away every advantage. "I simply don't know what we'll tell people," she would wail. Her concern wasn't for my well-being. It was for the family's social standing. Sophie perfected the art of condescending sympathy. "I feel so terrible for her," I overheard her telling a friend. The pressure was simply too much for poor Bella. Her sympathy was a sharper blade than my father's silence, reframing my choices as evidence of my own weakness. But the true calculated nature of my exclusion emerged when I was 22. I had just had a terrible row with my father. I'd refused to apply to law school at Cambridge, a path he had already predetermined for me. He saw it as the only respectable civilian career for a Harrington who wouldn't serve. I saw it as another golden cage. Later that evening, seeking refuge in the quiet of his mahogany-panelled study, I discovered an envelope on his desk. It was from Whitmore and Associates, the ancient London law firm that had managed my family's affairs for over a century. Unease moved through me. I shouldn't have looked, but some instinct compelled me to understand the forces shaping my life. My hands trembled as I removed the documents. It was an updated draft of my father's will. I scanned the pages, the legal language blurring until my eyes caught on one paragraph. There it was, my name, Isabel Harrington, with a single brutal black line drawn through it. I was crossed out from the list of primary heirs alongside Sophie. The document then detailed my new diminished status. I would receive only a small trust fund, but even that came with severe restrictions. The funds would be released solely upon my demonstration of maturity and adherence to core family values, a vague and impossible standard to be judged exclusively by my parents. It was a legal tombstone. They hadn't simply been disappointed in me. They had actively, legally, and financially written me out of their lives. The study air grew cold and thin. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked, each second marking my new reality as an outsider. I was officially, contractually disowned. That cold paper made the sapphire on my finger feel warmer, heavier, loaded with different meaning. It pulled me back to another memory, a counterpoint to that suffocating silence. It was the day General Ashford gave me this ring, just before my first deep cover assignment. We were in his sparse office, a place that valued function over decoration. He poured me black coffee in a thick ceramic mug. He looked at me, his eyes kind but piercing, seeing the hurt I worked so hard to conceal. "Your family," he began, his voice a low rumble. "They have their legacy. It's built on parades, press conferences, and polished medals. It's a fine legacy for what it's worth." He paused. "But there is another kind of legacy, Bella. It's the one your grandfather and I believed in. It's built in the shadows by people who will never be thanked. whose victories will never be celebrated. He opened a small box and revealed the sapphire ring. It wasn't large or flashy like the family diamond, but its deep blue seemed to hold an entire universe within it. "This ring," he said, placing it in my palm, "represents that other legacy. It's more valuable than any diamond because it represents not what you inherit, but what you protect. Not who you are, but what you do when no one is watching." He gently took my hand and slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. "James may see a legacy of stone and gold," he said, using my father's first name with casual familiarity. "But you, Bella, you are now part of a legacy of quiet sacrifice. Never forget that." That promise became my only true inheritance. It was the foundation I built my life on when the ground beneath me had been legally cut away. General Ashford gave me a new legacy, but he couldn't give me a new family. If my own parents could so coldly erase me from their lives, who could I possibly trust? Who could I believe in except myself? That question of trust echoed in my Chelsea flat. Trusting myself became the only option remaining. My life became a carefully constructed duality, an exhausting performance. I drove my sensible Honda Civic from the secure government car park back to this small, impersonal flat. It wasn't a home. It was a safe house, an operations station. Everything was neat, grey, and utterly devoid of personality. No photographs on the walls, no sentimental objects on shelves, just secure lines, reinforced doors, and the constant low hum of encrypted servers. This was the lonely architecture of the life I had constructed. By day, I was Bella Harrington, the quiet policy analyst at the Department for Energy Security. I wore nondescript trouser suits, attended mind-numbing meetings about renewable energy regulations, and ate pre-packaged salads at my desk, while my colleagues assumed I was simply competent, but dull. They had no idea that the obscure reports I filed were covers for intelligence I was feeding to the service. But when darkness fell over London, Bella ceased to exist. The door was locked 3 times, the security system engaged, the blackout curtains drawn. In the blue glow of my monitors, I became Anya. My evenings were a blur of decoding intercepts from foreign operatives, analyzing satellite imagery, and managing assets in hostile regions. Dinner was usually a staff's frozen meal, eaten without tasting it, my eyes never leaving the data streams. The faces of the agents I directed, people whose lives depended on my decisions, were just code names and pixelated images. I was forbidden from forming attachments, from even remembering their real names. It was necessary. It was soul-crushing. Sleep became a luxury. Short, fitful naps interrupted by alerts from across the world. Some nights the exhaustion was a physical weight, crushing pressure behind my eyes. On those nights, I would get in my car and just drive. I'd head north on the M6, away from the city's sterile glow, deep into the rural heart of the Midlands. My destination was always the same, a 24-hour transport cafe off a forgotten exit, its bright neon sign a beacon in the darkness. I'd sit in a worn vinyl booth, the air thick with the smell of sizzling bacon and burnt coffee. I would order black coffee and a plate of chips with eggs. The night shift waitress, a kind older woman named Dorothy, with tired eyes and a warm smile, got to know me. She never asked what I did or why a young woman was always alone at 3 a.m. She just kept my coffee cup full. "You look exhausted, love," she'd say, her voice raspy from years of cigarettes and conversation. "Eat up. You need your strength." That simple, unearned kindness from a stranger was an anchor. In that brightly lit transport cafe, surrounded by lorry drivers and night workers, I wasn't Bella or Anya. I was just a tired woman eating chips. For a few precious moments, I felt human. One night, back in my flat, I was reviewing the after-action report for Operation Northlight. It was the mission that had cost General Ashford his life and nearly cost me mine. A sudden, sharp pain radiated from my left shoulder blade, an old ache from a wound that would never fully heal. I reached back, my fingers tracing the jagged raised scar beneath my shirt, a permanent souvenir from shrapnel. It was a physical reminder of the price of this life. I had traded everything for it. I had traded a family, however broken, for secrets. I had traded the possibility of love for the certainty of duty. I had traded a normal life, a life of garden parties and holiday celebrations, for the cold, lonely burden of power and responsibility. Staring at my reflection in the dark monitor, I saw the dark circles under my eyes, the tension in my jaw. Was it worth it? The question hung in the empty room like an accusation. The oppressive loneliness of my Chelsea flat felt like a different world as I drove through the winding, tree-lined roads of the Lake District. The air here was different, cleaner, scented with pine and damp earth. My destination was Northlight Station, the clandestine research and development facility that was the heart of the service. Tucked away in a secluded valley, hidden from satellite eyes and civilian observation, this place was more of a home to me than my family's Knightsbridge house had ever been. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I didn't have to pretend. As I passed through the final unmarked security checkpoint, a familiar figure was waiting on the steps of the main building. Major David Sinclair, a living legend in the Special Forces community. Sinclair was a man carved from granite and steel, his eyes having witnessed more than most history books contained. He had been General Ashford's right hand for 30 years. Now he was my most trusted ally. He was the only person in the entire organization who knew my complete story. The only one with permission to bypass all protocol. As I stepped out of the car, he gave a short, respectful nod. He didn't salute. He didn't call me Director or Anya. Bella, he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound that was strangely comforting. Good to have you back. Just hearing my real name spoken with simple, unadorned respect made the tension in my shoulders ease for the first time in days. Here, I wasn't the disappointing daughter or the enigmatic director. I was just Bella later that evening. After a long day of briefings on the Chimera Protocol, I found myself in Sinclair's office. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, high-tech labs filling the rest of the facility. His office was a small, quiet space that smelled of old leather, gun oil, and strong coffee. The walls were lined with bookshelves, groaning under military history. The only decoration was a framed photograph of his old unit in Afghanistan. He motioned for me to sit in a worn leather armchair as he retrieved a bottle of top-shelf Highland single malt and 2 heavy crystal glasses from a locked cabinet. He poured 2 fingers into each glass, neat, and handed one to me without a word. I took a slow sip, the warmth spreading through my chest, chasing away the lingering chill from my family's dinner. Sinclair settled into his chair behind his large oak desk, studying me with a knowing, steady gaze. He didn't rush the silence. He let it sit between us, a comfortable quiet I never experienced anywhere else. "You look troubled," he finally said, his voice calm and direct. "More than usual. Was it your family again?" The question was so straightforward, so devoid of judgment that I found myself answering honestly. "My father gave Sophie the heirloom ring," I said quietly. "Told me I wasn't worthy of it." Sinclair didn't offer empty comfort or pretend it didn't matter. He just nodded slowly, deep understanding in his eyes. He knew my family's dynamics almost as well as I did. He listened as I recounted the cold words, the dismissive gestures. He was a rock, absorbing the impact of my pain without flinching. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Be careful, Bella," he said, his tone shifting from paternal to professional. "Your family is a distraction, but there's a real threat emerging. Adrian Blackwell is back on the grid." My blood ran cold. Blackwell was the rogue operative responsible for the disaster of Operation Northlight, the man whose ambition had gotten General Ashford killed. He's working as a security consultant for a defense contractor with deep ties to the Ministry of Defense, Sinclair continued. He hasn't forgotten that you were the one who exposed him. A man like that doesn't forgive. He waits. The news landed like a lead weight in my stomach. The warmth of the whiskey vanished. Sinclair saw the change in me. He leaned forward, pulling his wallet from his back pocket. He didn't pull out a file or mission directive. He pulled out a worn, creased photograph of a smiling woman and a little girl with bright, laughing eyes. "My daughter and my granddaughter, Sarah," he said, his gruff voice softening with affection. He slid the photo across the desk. "This, Bella, is real family. It's not about bloodlines or last names. It's about who stands in your corner when the whole world is against you. It's about who shows up." He looked me straight in the eye. "General Ashford loved you like a daughter. He saw you as his true successor. And for what it's worth, so do I. You are his legacy, not your father's. Don't you ever forget that." His words were a shield, armor for my weary soul. For a moment, the profound weight of my loneliness lifted. I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. I had an ally. I had a family not of blood, but of choice, forged in shadows and bound by loyalty. The warning from David Sinclair about Adrian Blackwell echoed in my mind for days, a low-frequency hum of impending danger. So when my mother's number flashed on my secure phone a week later, my guard was already up. I was in the middle of a systems diagnostic at Northlight Station, far removed from my family's chaotic dynamics. I let it ring twice before answering. Bella, darling. Her voice was honey-sweet, a tone she reserved for public appearances or when she wanted something significant. It immediately sent alarm bells through me. Your father and I were thinking, it's been far too long. We would love to take you to dinner at the Waterside Inn. Just the three of us. A real family evening. A real family evening. The words were a carefully chosen lure. And the Waterside Inn wasn't just dinner. It was a stage. A Michelin-starred restaurant nestled in the Thames Valley. It was the Harrington family's preferred venue for orchestrating major life decisions, business deals, and most often, ultimatums. It was where they had announced Sophie's appointment to the Naval Academy, and where they had informed me they were cutting off my university fund after I switched my major from political science to cryptography. My logical mind, the Anya part of me, knew it was a trap. The warning about Blackwell was too fresh, the timing too convenient. But the Bella part, the neglected daughter who still existed somewhere deep inside, clung to a sliver of irrational hope. Maybe this time, a foolish voice whispered, it will be different. I agreed. The drive to the restaurant was a quiet battle within myself. I chose my outfit with the precision of a field agent preparing for a mission. A simple, elegant black dress, professional but understated armor. The restaurant was as opulent as I remembered, plush carpets, impossibly intricate floral arrangements, and the hushed reverence of diners paying a small fortune for culinary art. My parents were already seated at a secluded corner table. My mother, in a Chanel suit, smiled brilliantly as I approached, a public display of maternal affection that felt utterly hollow. My father, the Admiral, stood and gave me a stiff, formal hug that felt more like a porn move. The first hour was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. They were charming. They asked about my work at the Department for Energy Security with feigned interest. They reminisced about a happy childhood holiday to Cornwall, a memory carefully edited to exclude any of the usual tensions. They ordered a bottle of exorbitantly priced Bordeaux and insisted I have a glass. It was a performance, a carefully constructed illusion of a loving, functional family. The food arrived, delicate plates of seared foie gras and truffle-dusted scallops, but I could barely taste it. The knot in my stomach tightened with every passing minute of their charade. Finally, as the dessert plates were cleared, my father leaned forward. Steepling his fingers, the performance was over. Bella, he began, his voice shifting from warm patriarch to commanding officer. We have a small family matter to discuss. He spoke of an old friend, a man named Robert Ashworth, who owned a major defense contracting firm. Ashworth's company, he explained, was in the running for a massive multi-billion-pound energy infrastructure contract, but was facing bureaucratic headwinds. I know you work at the Department for Energy Security, he said, his gaze locking onto mine. You're in a position to hear things. We're not asking for much, just some internal insight, a heads up on the competition's bids, perhaps a good word with the right people. He paused, letting the weight of his request sink in. It would be a great help to Ashworth and, in turn, a great help to this family. It's time you started acting like a Harrington again, Bella. Prove that you're still one of us. There it was, the transaction. Love and belonging in exchange for a felony. The air grew thick, the silence broken only by the distant murmur of other diners. I placed my fork down on the linen tablecloth, the small click loud in the tense quiet. I looked directly into my father's eyes, my voice emerging calm and cold, a tone he had never heard from me before. The internal insight you're asking for is classified information, Father. A federal crime. I didn't stop there. I let the second shoe drop. And your friend, Mr. Ashworth, his firm Ashworth Defense Systems, is currently under a quiet federal investigation for its financial ties to a certain security consultant. I let the name hang in the air between us. A man named Adrian Blackwell. The color drained from my father's face. He was stunned into silence. My mother, however, immediately went on the defensive, her polished mask cracking. Bella, that's a dreadful accusation, she hissed, her voice low but sharp. You're always so dramatic, making everything so complicated. Your father is simply asking for a small favor for your family. But I saw the truth in their shocked expressions. They knew. They knew about Blackwell and they didn't care. They were willing to use me, to risk my career and my freedom to settle a debt for a corrupt friend. The last fragile ember of hope inside me died, turning to cold, hard ash. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had fundamentally misunderstood who I had become. I slowly folded my napkin and placed it on the table. My decision was made. The silence in my car on the drive back from the restaurant was heavier than any argument. I knew my refusal wasn't just a no. It was a declaration of war. I didn't have to wait long for their first strike. 3 days later, I was summoned to the office of my direct supervisor at the Department for Energy Security, a bland man named Mr. Henderson. His usual placid demeanor was gone, replaced by grave concern. He closed his office door, a gesture that immediately sent adrenaline through me. "Bella," he began, avoiding my eyes and shuffling papers on his desk. "We've received a disturbing communication, an anonymous one." He slid a printed email across the desk toward me. I picked it up, my hands steady despite the tremor starting deep inside. The email was a character assassination cloaked in the language of civic duty. It painted me as an unstable individual, citing a troubled history of non-compliance and insubordination during my time at Sandhurst. It suggested that my quiet nature was not professionalism, but a sign of potential psychological instability, and concluded by ominously questioning if I was truly suitable for a position with access to sensitive government information. It was a smear campaign designed to destroy my career and my credibility. My eyes scanned to the bottom of the page, to the metadata the IT department had managed to pull. The email had been sent from a public terminal. A public terminal located in the library of the Army and Navy Club, the exclusive London institution where my father had been a member for 40 years. It was his handiwork. He hadn't just been angry. He had acted. He had tried to burn down the one small, quiet life I had built for myself, all because I had refused to break the law for him. The pain was sharp, but it was quickly being consumed by a cold, rising tide of fury. I drove straight from my office to the gleaming glass and steel residential tower where my sister lived in Westminster. I didn't call first. I bypassed the doorman with a flash of my government ID and took the lift straight to her penthouse. Sophie opened the door dressed in athletic wear, a look of surprise quickly morphing into annoyance. "Bella, what are you doing here?" she asked, blocking the doorway. I held up the printed email. "This," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "This is what I'm doing here. Did you know about this?" She glanced at the paper, her eyes flicking over the words. For a moment, guilt crossed her face, but it was quickly extinguished, replaced by the familiar Harrington defensiveness. I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Don't lie to me, Sophie," I said, stepping past her into the apartment. "The Army and Navy Club. That's his sanctuary. You knew he was going to do something." She finally broke, her voice rising with indignation. "He's our father, Bella. You humiliated him. You refused to help the family. Refused to do one simple thing after everything he's done for you." "Everything he's done for me?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that surprised even me. "You mean disowning me or trying to get me fired from a job he thinks is beneath me? You think you're so much better than us, don't you?" She shot back, her words laced with years of resentment. "Hiding away in your little government job, judging all of us. You defied an admiral of the Royal Navy. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? Dad just wanted to teach you a lesson about loyalty," I said. That was it. The final clarifying blow. In their twisted world, I was the one who was wrong. My refusal to commit a crime was an act of disloyalty that required punishment. The last vestiges of pain inside me solidified into something hard and unyielding. The part of me that had always hoped, always yearned for their approval, died in that moment. In Sophie's luxurious, sun-drenched living room, I turned and walked back to the door without another word. "Where are you going?" Sophie called after me, uncertainty in her voice. I paused at the threshold, but didn't look back. "To learn my lesson," I said. The drive back to my flat in Chelsea was a blur of cold, clear-eyed rage. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. This was no longer about being ignored or unloved. This was about survival. They didn't just want to control me. They wanted to destroy me. I walked into my safe house, locked the 3 locks, and went directly to my workstation. The anger wasn't hot and chaotic anymore. It was focused, a laser beam of pure, undiluted resolve. I sat down, my posture perfect, and looked at the sapphire ring on my finger. I remembered General Ashford's words, "A legacy of silent service, what you do when no one is watching." For years, I had protected this country from its enemies in the shadows. Now I had to protect myself. My fingers flew across the encrypted keyboard, the clicking of the keys, the only sound in the room. I composed a new message, my purpose absolute. I addressed it to Sinclair. The subject line was simple: "Activate Chimera Protocol." The body of the message was even simpler. Target acquisition, Adrian Blackwell, and all associated assets. I stared at the words for a single silent heartbeat. Then I hit send. The send icon on my screen flashed once, a digital point of no return. Less than 60 seconds later, my secure line buzzed with an incoming call from a protected number. It was Sinclair, Anya. His voice was all business, stripped of the warmth from our earlier conversation. The game is on. What's your first move? Get me a SIF, I ordered, using the acronym for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. And get our best network analysts. We're going hunting. Within the hour, a sterile conference room deep inside Northlight Station had been transformed into a war room. The quiet hum of high-powered servers replaced the silence. Giant wall-mounted screens glowed with complex data streams, charts, and satellite maps. Sinclair stood by my side, a silent, imposing presence, while two of our top analysts, a young prodigy named Mitchell and a veteran named Walsh, typed furiously at their terminals. In this room, I was not the timid Bella Harrington. I was Director Anya, and the cold, calculated rage that had propelled me here had now settled into a state of hyper-focused clarity. This was my element. Mitchell, I commanded, my voice crisp and clear. I want a full workup on Adrian Blackwell's digital footprint for the past 7 years. Financial transactions, known associates, shell corporations, encrypted communications. I want to know what he had for breakfast. Walsh? Focus on Ashworth Defense Systems. I want to see every pound that has flowed between Ashworth and Blackwell. Follow the money. For the next 48 hours, we worked relentlessly, fueled by black coffee and a shared sense of purpose. The screens filled with a complex web of deceit. We uncovered offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, ghost employees on Ashworth's payroll, and encrypted messages that hinted at a much larger network of corruption. It was clear that my father's friend wasn't just helping Blackwell. He was a key partner in his schemes. My plan began to form, a three-pronged strategy. First, expose Blackwell's current illegal activities. Second, sever his financial lifelines by linking him to Ashworth. Third, and most importantly, set a trap so perfect that he would walk into it himself, implicating everyone involved. The key to that trap, I realized with a grim sense of irony, was my own sister. Sinclair, I said, pointing to a flagged log file on the main screen. A few weeks ago, an unauthorized access attempt was made on a legacy drive I once used. The attempt came from a terminal here at Northlight Station, using a naval officer's credentials. Sinclair's eyes narrowed. Sophie, he stated, not as a question. Yes, I confirmed. She didn't get through, but she left a digital fingerprint, a breadcrumb. Blackwell is a master of counterintelligence. If he's been monitoring my family looking for a way in, he would have seen that attempt. He would interpret it as a weakness, a sloppy mistake by a disgruntled family member, a potential vulnerability to exploit. A plan crystallized in my mind. We're going to use that breadcrumb. We'll create a honeypot, a decoy server that mimics a classified Ministry of Defense network. We'll seed it with what looks like top-secret drone schematics, incredibly valuable data, and we'll leave a single subtle entry point that appears to be linked to Sophie's failed hack. We're not just setting a trap for a hacker. We're baiting Blackwell's ego. He'll believe he's outsmarting my stupid little sister to get to me. But to make the trap truly effective, I needed an ally inside the Ministry of Defense. Someone with the authority to convene the right people at the right time. There was only one logical choice, and it was a risky one. I placed a secure video call to Colonel Charlotte Pembroke, the formidable head of the service's internal security division. Pembroke was a sharp, no-nonsense officer who had in the past viewed my unconventional methods with suspicion. Her face appeared on the screen, her expression impassive. "Director Anya," she said curtly. I didn't waste time. I laid out the entire operation, from my father's request and my refusal to the anonymous email and my subsequent investigation into Blackwell. I told her about the honeypot strategy. And I didn't hide Sophie's involvement. I told her everything, laying my cards on the table. It was a calculated risk. Exposing my family's dysfunction was a vulnerability, but transparency was the only way to earn her trust. Pembroke listened without interruption, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, processing. I could see the gears turning behind her steely gaze. "You're using your own family's disastrous attempt to subvert you as bait for a high-level intelligence operation," she said finally. "You're putting your entire career and the service's reputation on this one play." "Yes," I replied simply. A slow, thin smile spread across her lips. It was the first time I had ever seen her smile. "I like it," she said. "It's audacious. It's clean. You have my full support, Director. Tell me what you need." The pieces were in place. The weapon was assembled. I looked at the screen where Mitchell had just finished setting up the honeypot server. "Now," I said to Sinclair, a cold calm settling over me, "we wait for the snake to take the bait." The bait was taken. 2 days after we set the honeypot, Adrian Blackwell, blinded by his own arrogance, triggered the final alert. Believing he had successfully infiltrated a highly classified Ministry of Defense server, he initiated a full data transfer. The trap was sprung. The next morning, I found myself in the one place I had spent my life trying to avoid. A secure hearing room deep inside the Ministry of Defense main building. The room was a sterile, windowless box designed for secrets and interrogations. The air was cold, recycled, and thick with tension. Seated around a polished mahogany table were some of the most powerful figures in the UK military and intelligence communities. An Air Vice Marshal, the Deputy Director of GCHQ, and several other high-ranking officials. And at the far end of the table, seated next to each other, were my father and my sister. Admiral Harrington was there in his capacity as a respected senior advisor. Commander Sophie Harrington was present as a person of interest, the supposed origin of the security breach. I sat opposite them, a low-level analyst from the Department for Energy Security, the designated scapegoat for the day's proceedings. David Sinclair stood against the back wall, a silent, unreadable statue. The star witness, of course, was Adrian Blackwell. He was brought in not as a suspect, but as the expert consultant who had uncovered the breach. He strode into the room with an air of smug confidence, dressed in an expensive suit, a picture of corporate success. He shook hands with the generals, his smile smooth and practiced. He nodded condescendingly at me. My father and sister looked on, their expressions a mixture of grim satisfaction and anticipation. This was it. This was the stage for my public execution. Blackwell began his presentation, his voice confident and clinical. He used a laser pointer to highlight complex network diagrams on a large screen, weaving a convincing narrative of a significant data exfiltration. He spoke of sloppy security protocols and a vulnerable entry point that he had traced back to a specific user's credentials, Commander Sophie Harrington. He then artfully suggested that the breach likely originated from someone close to her, someone with a history of instability and a lower security clearance. He never said my name, but every eye in the room turned to me. I could feel the weight of their suspicion, the silent judgment. I met my father's gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, only a cold, hard finality. He believed this. He wanted to believe this. Sophie wore a mask of concerned professionalism, but I could see the triumphant glint in her eyes. "In conclusion," Blackwell said, turning to the panel, "this represents a catastrophic failure of internal security. The individual responsible must be identified and dealt with immediately to prevent further damage to our national security." He sat down to a murmur of grave agreement. The trap was perfectly set, but it wasn't for me. The Air Vice Marshal cleared his throat, ready to pass sentence. But before he could speak, Colonel Charlotte Pembroke, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. "General, if I may," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Thank you for that theatrical presentation, Mr. Blackwell. Before we proceed, I believe it's crucial we hear from the individual with the highest authority on non-traditional threats in this room." A confused silence fell. The general looked at Pembroke, then around the table. "And who would that be, Colonel?" Pembroke turned her head, her gaze locking directly onto me. Her voice was clear, precise, and echoed in the stunned silence of the room. "Director Anya Harrington, of course. Director, perhaps you could shed some light on this situation for us." Time seemed to stop. Every head swiveled in my direction. The sound in the room was a collective sharp intake of breath. I saw my father's jaw literally drop, his face a mask of utter disbelief. His eyes, which had been so cold and judgmental moments before, were now wide with confusion and a dawning horror. Beside him, Sophie went pale, ghostly white, her professional composure shattered, revealing the raw shock beneath. She stared at me as if she had never seen me before in her life. Across the room, I saw the barest hint of a smile touch the corner of David Sinclair's lips. I rose slowly from my chair. The mousy, invisible Bella they had all come to condemn was gone. In her place stood Anya, the director of the service. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Thank you, Colonel Pembroke," I said. my voice calm and carrying an authority that silenced any potential interruption. Mr. Blackwell is correct about one thing. There has been a data breach. However, it was not a breach of our systems. It was a breach into his. I nodded to Sinclair, who tapped a command into a tablet. The main screen behind me changed. Blackwell's confident presentation was replaced by a live feed of his own encrypted network. The entire data leak, I explained, my voice cold and precise, was in fact a honeypot operation designed and executed by the service. We seeded a decoy server with phantom data. These drone schematics Mr. Blackwell was so proud of finding and led him to it using a digital breadcrumb he believed was a vulnerability. I walked toward the screen, my gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of the officers, then landing on Blackwell, whose face was now a mess of sweat and panic. For the past 72 hours, every keystroke Mr. Blackwell has made, every encrypted message he has sent, every pound he has moved has been logged by a Trojan horse he willingly downloaded onto his own system. The screen split, showing Blackwell's offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, detailing illegal wire transfers to shell corporations. It showed encrypted emails between him and Robert Ashworth discussing their plan to use my father to pressure me. It showed everything. The web of deceit was laid bare for everyone to see. Mr. Blackwell was not uncovering a threat, I concluded, turning back to the panel. He was the threat, and he has just delivered his entire criminal enterprise directly to us. As I finished speaking, the heavy doors at the back of the hearing room swung open. Two stone-faced men in dark suits and National Crime Agency windbreakers entered the room. They walked directly to Blackwell, who was frozen in his chair, his face ashen. "Adrian Blackwell," one of the agents said, his voice flat. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, espionage, and multiple violations of federal security laws." As they pulled him to his feet and snapped handcuffs around his wrists, the room was utterly silent. The officers, my father, my sister, they were all statues, paralyzed by the whiplash of the last 10 minutes. The war with Blackwell was over. The heavy doors closed behind the federal agents, leaving a profound silence in their wake. I didn't look at the defeated officers or the stunned officials. My eyes found my father and my sister. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. Fear and utter, complete disbelief. The reckoning with my family had just begun. The meeting was adjourned. The officers and officials filed out with new guarded respect in their eyes, some offering me stiff, formal nods. I barely noticed. After the heavy doors closed behind the last of them, a profound silence descended. Sinclair gave me a single understanding nod from across the room before quietly excusing himself, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my family. For a long moment, the three of us just stood there, frozen in the cold, sterile light of the Ministry of Defense hearing room. The reckoning had arrived. My father was the first to find his voice. The shock in his eyes had curdled into a dark, sputtering rage. He followed me as I collected my things, his footsteps heavy on the tiled floor. He didn't wait until we were out of the room. He cornered me near the door, his face flushed and his voice a low, furious growl. "What have you done, Bella?" he hissed. His use of my full first name a clear sign of his fury. "You have humiliated me. You have dragged the Harrington name through the mud in front of my peers." I turned to face him, and for the first time in my life, I felt no fear. The years of intimidation, of cowering under his disapproval, had been burned away in the fire of the last week. I looked him straight in the eye. "The Harrington name?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet, colder than his had ever been. "Let's talk about the Harrington name, Father. Is the family honor in trying to coerce your daughter into committing a federal crime to protect a corrupt business associate? Or is it in writing her out of your will because she chose a different path? Tell me. I would love to understand your definition of honor." His face went from red to pale. The accusations spoken aloud with such clarity left him speechless. He had no defense against the truth. It was Sophie who stepped forward then, her face pale and streaked with tears. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked look. "Bella, I'm so sorry," she stammered, reaching a hand out to me. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the extent of it." I looked at her outstretched hand, but made no move to take it. The apology felt hollow. A last-ditch effort to salvage something from the ruins. "You didn't know," I replied, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Or you didn't want to know, Sophie. Which is it? All my life you just needed me to be the failure so you could be the star. You needed my quietness to make your ambition seem more brilliant. You were never my sister. You were my competitor, my warden. Every word was a truth I had swallowed for decades, and now they were out, sharp and undeniable. She flinched as if struck, her hand falling back to her side. She had nothing to say because she knew it was true. The foundation of our entire relationship had been built on that toxic dynamic, and I had just demolished it. I am not the one who brought dishonor to this family, I said, my gaze shifting back to my stunned father. I am the one who cleaned up the mess. I slowly, deliberately pulled the sapphire ring from my finger, the ring from General Ashford, the symbol of my true legacy. I held it in my palm, the metal cool against my skin. You were right about one thing. Father, I said, holding his gaze. That diamond heirloom ring, it isn't for me. Because I don't belong to your world anymore. I don't subscribe to your version of legacy. I turned my back on them both, on the years of pain and quiet suffering, and walked toward the door. Bella, wait, my father called out, a note of desperation in his voice now. But it was too late. From now on, I said, pausing with my hand on the door, but not turning around, do not contact me, either of you. I walked out into the long, anonymous corridor of the Ministry of Defense and didn't look back, leaving them standing alone amidst the wreckage they had created. Walking through the car park, the cool, concrete-scented air felt clean. A profound sense of release washed over me, a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The war was over, I had won. But as I got into my car and the adrenaline began to fade, the victory felt hollow. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. In their place was a vast, quiet emptiness. I had won the war, burned the bridges, and saved myself. But now, standing alone in the aftermath, I had to figure out what came next. The weeks that followed the hearing were a blur of debriefings and reports. The service moved swiftly to dismantle Blackwell's network, and the political fallout for my father's associate, Robert Ashworth, was immediate and severe. I'd heard through back channels that my father had resigned from all his advisory boards. The Harrington name, once a shield of honor, had become a liability. I felt nothing hearing this news. Not satisfaction, not pity, just a profound hollow distance. A few months later, on a crisp autumn day, a small private memorial service was held for General Sir Edward Ashford at Westminster Abbey. It was to mark the anniversary of his death during Operation Northlight. There were no press, no politicians. Only a handful of us from the service stood in quiet reverence. The dignity of the place, the ancient stones and the distant mournful sound of bells being tolled created a sense of solemn peace. I stood before his memorial and placed a single white rose at its base. David Sinclair stood beside me, his weathered face impassive, but his presence a solid comfort. Looking at the small group assembled, Pembroke, Mitchell, Walsh, and a few other senior operatives, I realized I wasn't alone. This was my family now. A family forged not by blood, but by shared secrets, mutual respect, and a silent, unwavering commitment to a cause larger than ourselves. As we stood in a moment of silence, Sinclair placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of pity, but of solidarity, a quiet acknowledgement of a shared loss and a shared purpose. When I returned to my flat that afternoon, there was a single piece of mail in my box that wasn't a bill or junk mail. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name written on the front in handwriting I recognized instantly, though I hadn't seen it in years. It was from Sophie. My first instinct was to throw it away, to not let that world touch this newfound sense of peace. But curiosity, or perhaps some final lingering thread of connection, made me open it. The letter inside, written on heavy stationery, was not the rambling, self-serving apology I had expected. It was short, direct, and startlingly honest. She wrote that she had refused to accept the heirloom diamond ring from our father. She told me she had put in for a transfer to the Far East Station, as far from London and the family's influence as she could get. The letter ended with a few simple, powerful sentences. You were right about everything, Bella. I spent my whole life competing with a ghost, and I never stopped to see the person who was actually there. I need to find out who I am without the Harrington name weighing me down. I hope you find your peace. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It was a declaration of independence. It was in its own way a final quiet goodbye. I folded the letter and put it away, a strange mix of sadness and relief settling over me. The bridge was well and truly burned, but perhaps on the other side, we could both finally start to build something new for ourselves. The following spring, I bought a small rustic cabin nestled deep in the Lake District, not far from Northlight Station. It was made of dark wood with a wide porch and a stone fireplace. It was the first place that ever truly felt like mine. One cool morning, I stood on that porch, a warm ceramic mug of black coffee in my hands, and watched the sun rise over the misty valley. The air was clean and cold, and the only sound was the chirping of birds. The sapphire ring, General Ashford's ring, was back on my finger. It felt different now, not a burden or a secret, but a quiet, comfortable part of me. I was no longer the broken Bella, desperate for approval, nor was I the cold, calculating Anya running on rage. I was just Isabella, a woman who had walked through fire and found a quiet strength on the other side. My legacy wasn't the one my father had tried to force upon me. A legacy of names and portraits in gilded frames. My legacy was silent. It was in the operations I ran, the threats I neutralized, the lives that were safe because of the work I did in the shadows. It wasn't a legacy that would ever be carved in stone, but it was real. The sun climbed higher, flooding the valley with golden light. The ghosts of the past were quiet now, not gone, but finally at peace. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I looked toward the future. Not as something to be endured, but as something to be built. I felt a profound, unshakable sense of peace. My journey taught me that true peace doesn't come from a family's approval, but from accepting your own path and finding the courage to walk it. It's a quiet strength, a legacy built in silence. If any part of my story resonated with the strength you have found in your own life, I would be honored if you would leave a blue heart in the comments to share that peaceful energy with others. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel Hidden Family, Infidelity, and Revenge. There are so many more stories of quiet resilience waiting to be told, and I want to share them with you.